Listen to the rumble. Listen to the roar. Slowly in 3. They'll be flying off 4. Watch them now.
What you wanted the lathe to turn and bolt it down, the stylus followed it and controlled the lathe hydraulically. And that's how I got those centers like that. And making the first one was a bunch of fun, but the other 3 was a pain in the ass. It was work.
Welcome back, race fans. That was the legend Bill Akin. The podcast this week is going to be on Bill, and I'm going to be telling Cameron here some stories about Bill Akin and the time I spent with him. If you follow my Instagram, you will know that our friend Bill Akin, he was a giant in the vintage Indy car world. Just an expert restorer, and by far my favorite grumpy old racer ever. He passed away over the weekend after a pretty hard few months with heart problems. And those that knew Bill, it didn't really come as a surprise. Bill didn't live a real healthy life. He liked cigarettes. I think there was more smoke going into him than oxygen, but we'll get back to that. We got a few recordings of Bill that I had on my phone from my visits there when I would record him talking, and we'll get to those later. We just got back from the Detroit Autorama. We were down there in the basement with our booth, the Shaw's Vintage Racing booth, and we had a great show. Anyone that stopped in out there and said hi, it was really cool to hear from you guys, and we're glad you're enjoying the podcast. We're still finding our legs here and getting going, but promise you we'll be bringing some great things. We've got amazing lineup of guests coming in the future, from old racers to new racers to old historians. Just kind of runs the gamut all over the place. I'm happy to say that we're overloaded with guests and having to kind of pick and choose to fit our schedule. I know one thing, when racing season starts, it's going to get hectic. But tonight we're going to talk about our friend Bill. And I haven't told Cam too much about Bill just because I wanted to hold out. Bill passed away at 73 years old, and I read his obituary and found out he was a 5th-generation Tennessean in the same town of Hermitage, Tennessee that his great-great-grandfather settled in like the 1860s. Yeah, I mean, the guy was all Tennessean right there. And you could tell he came from that old ways. To say Bill was ornery is an understatement. There's people out there that will say Bill was a mean old son of a bitch, and he could be. But if you were the type of guy that would tell Bill he was a mean old son of a bitch, he'd probably like you then. He'd love you then. He'd just say, you got that shit right. The very first time, there's the first time I met Bill, but the first time I ever saw Bill, I didn't know who he was. I was at the Street Rod Nationals in 2001 with my 32 sedan, like very first got it done. And I was early 20s, and we went down there, and I drove my sedan there, and we're walking around, Dad and I are walking around the show, and we walk up on a very famous hot rod. It's a 32 Ford Roadster, orange, and it's the Tom Medley hot rod. This thing's been on the cover of Hot Rod magazine. It's been on all the magazines, and Tom Medley was a cartoon artist for Hot Rod, so I followed him closely growing up. He was one of my heroes. And this thing has Tom Medley cartoons painted on the doors, and it's channeled, and it's got this old traditional look. And at the time, the traditional thing was just coming on, so to see traditional hot rods, you had to really walk far at Louisville and kind of find them here and there. And Dad and I walked up on this orange 32 Roadster, and it had just a great look, and there were these 2 old codgers sitting in it, and they had the look. And it was like 100 degrees in the sun, and these guys were sitting in the car, and they weren't getting out. They were just sitting there. And I noticed people kept coming up to them and talking to them and leaving. Like they were the center of, they were holding court. So we walked up, and I kind of looked around and started commenting on it and found out real quick that it was Tom Medley himself sitting in the passenger seat. And I got to meet Tom Medley, and I ended up driving my sedan over there and having Tom sign the dash. And I was really, awestruck at this legendary hot rodder talking to me. And the whole time I wasn't paying attention to the old guy in the driver's seat. And that was Bill. And I didn't know that till years later. I just some grumpy old asshole in the seat that, in the driver's seat that wouldn't talk to me. Oh, well, whatever. So years later, at the first hot rod reunion in Bowling Green, Kentucky, the very first annual one, they were going to have it at Beach Bend Drag Strip. And they still have it, and it's a great show. We decided to go down early on Wednesday to get a good camping spot. So we drive down early, and on Wednesday, before we leave, Roy Carruthers, a Hall of Fame midget driver from Indianapolis, we'll try to get him on the podcast someday, a really great guy, good friend. He calls me and says, hey, you're going down there to Bowling Green, you got to go by Bill Akin's place. And I said, who's Bill Akin? And of course, Roy got mad at me because I didn't know who Bill Akin is, but that's just how Roy is. He gets mad at me if I don't know who everyone is. So I said, well, no, we're not going there. And he said, oh, you got to go. This guy's he's the man on Indy Roadsters and Afi-engines. And I want you to go down there to the exit, and you're going to meet my friend Dave Steele and take him in there. And the reaction on your face right there, Cameron, was the reaction I had. Dave Steele. You say Dave Steele in the open wheel industry, we all say Dave Steele.
Yeah.
We know the guy.
Yeah.
Totally different Dave Steele. So I figured this out real quick. On the way down, I'm kind of questioning Roy, like, why is Dave Steele down? And he's like, no, it's not that Dave Steele. Turns out it's David Steele that is with the American Hot Rod Federation today. We became great friends. To this day, we're good friends. Hot Rodders, you guys will know Dave. He's in Southern California. He's right in the thick of it all right now. Great guy. First time I met Dave Steele, we go to the exit. I meet up with Dave. I'm in my 32 sedan. Dave hops in with me. He's like, pitching car, man. We go to Bill's house, follow the directions, and we pull in. And it's kind of a normal house, and you drive up this driveway. Pretty house, pretty area. And the house is built on a hillside, and you drive around back of the house, and the basement opens up out the back of the house. We pull up in front of the door there, and look inside, and immediately both of us just say, oh, shit. There's 3 Indy Roadsters in there, half a dozen Afi-engines, finished, ready to go Afi-engines, parts everywhere, Afi parts everywhere, Indy wheels everywhere. There's 18-inch Halibran wheels and tires stacked to the ceiling, all the way up. And they're all Dow 7 coated perfectly. I mean, I went to heaven. So Roy must have gave us a good introduction, and Bill liked my hot rod because it was rowdy and loud, and he liked hot rods that were like that. He liked rowdiness. He liked getting loose. He liked tearing shit up. He was one of those guys. So we sat there at his garage, and we got to know him for like an hour and a half, and he was really welcoming to us. Bill could be extremely rude and flat ass ignore you, but he wouldn't be mean to you if you didn't have to be knowledgeable about Indy cars. You just had to be genuinely interested and ask good questions. And if you did that, he would talk to anyone. He liked young guys that were wanting to know about it. But if you didn't bring something worth his while in his head to the conversation, he would let you know it pretty quick. We went there, we hung out. That was on Wednesday. We left there and we went to the show. And at the show, Bill has an area every year that he would he'd bring an Indy Roadster out and a couple of his hot rods out. And it was a little triangle of grass with a shade tree, and everyone knew that was the Akin compound. And they even had a little sign that said Akin compound they put out. So while the show went on, the next couple days, I would drive my sedan over there and talk to him. And Bill had a Model A Roadster on deuce rails that has a 4-cam Ford in it that's on the street. I mean, straight up IndyCar engine on the street. And it, starts up, idles, drives, and all that. That's just the way Bill was. And it was in brown primer, and like the wheels on it he had made himself at home. That was, we have recording. I recorded him talking about making the wheels, and that's what you'll hear later in this podcast. But it's just a driven, hard hot rod, and very traditional, but mind-blowing that it had a 4-cam Ford in it. So we hung out the whole time there, and on Friday night, they have this big get-together, like a cruise-in. And I drove my hot rod in there, and Bill was sitting on the grass, kind of by the curb, and I rolled up there and killed the engine and coasted to a stop, and I said, "Can I park here?" And I'm sure he answered with, "I don't give a fuck," something like that. So I got out, and I got to talk to him that whole night, and that was one of the first times I saw him grade people as they walked up. The guys would walk up and try to talk, and he would just ignore them. Or if they were talking, he would just start talking over them. And what it was usually guys you didn't want to talk to anyway. So I admired Bill for the fact that he didn't put up with any shit. If he didn't want you there, you were gone.
Was that the
I mentioned that there were 3 Indy Roadsters in his garage. The oldest one was the 1955 Curtis Bardall car. It was a 500B, and it was driven by Jimmy Davies. It was a black Bardall Roadster, and it's what I call the fat Roadsters. It's the early ones. Number 15, actually. It might have been number 2 at one time, but the way it's restored with him, it's number 15. And that car, he won his first Pebble Beach with that car. And for the racers out there, or car guys that might not know, Pebble Beach is the highest, most prestigious car show in the country, and one of the top in the world. They just invited hot rods about 10 years ago. They have vintage race car classes, and if you win Pebble Beach, you're it. I mean, that's the most top high-end restorers of all time try to go and win Pebble Beach. And what you're going to hear in this story is Bill's a 3-time winner at Pebble Beach, and his license plates on his car said Pebble Beach winner, which was good. Anyways, he had the Roadster there, the black Roadster, and then he had a 1959 Quinn Epperly Roadster, the Bose Sealfast Roadster, the beautiful white and black Bose Sealfast car that we all drool over. He liked the Quinn Epperly cars for a couple of reasons. He thought they were the prettiest Roadsters. They were super low. The offies were laid all the way over on their side. The profile of them were perfect. If you park a Quinn Epperly Roadster next to a Watson Roadster, the Watson Roadster looks fat and tall. That's how low an Epperly Roadster is. But I found out over the years that Bill was also personal friends with Epperly. He got to know him, got to hang out with him. So those were special cars to him. He also had the 1960 Quinn Epperly Autolite Special, which was driven by Lloyd Ruby. And when I first met Bill, that car was white with fluorescent orange scallops and a number 5. And it said Autolite on the hood. And a few years later, Bill ended up repainting that car to its 1962 livery, which was blue and orange, and it was the Mid-Continental Express. And I believe he won his 2nd or 3rd Pebble Beach with that one. Actually, it was his 3rd. One of the really wild things about Bill was, I've never heard this happen ever another time. He won Pebble Beach twice with the same car, 2 different years, and that's unheard of. Because usually at Pebble Beach, they want to see new cars that haven't been out, kind of like the Riddler Award. The black Bardall car won Pebble Beach twice. And, I mean, to have a car that is so good you can take it to the same show twice and win, that's pretty stout. So the Mid-Continental won his 3rd, and later on, he got a 4th Indy Roadster, which he just finished a year and a half, 2 years ago, which was the 1962 Bryant Heating and Cooling Special, driven by Bobby Marshman. And that was an Epperly car as well. I got to do the lettering on that car, and we'll get back to that. So his cars were top-notch. These were not like... I mean, granted, all Indy cars are beautiful, but there's ones that are iconic, and he had the ones you wanted. His restorations were out of this world. Most restorers would go to Bill to get knowledge. This guy knew how the cars were supposed to be. And if you would see one of Bill's cars at a show and you didn't understand Indy race cars, you would think they were under-restored. But it's the exact opposite. Bill restored them to exactly how they were when they ran Indy. They weren't chrome from end to end. They weren't polished everything. They were CAD plated, Dow 7 mags. Everything was perfect, and his hardware was perfect. Bill was, every time I would take a car to a vintage event, he would come over and look over my cars, and he'd grade them and judge them for me. And I took it welcomingly, like, please do. And if Bill liked you, he had a way of telling you things that were wrong with your car that wasn't talking down to you. He could just, he could tell you this is wrong and that's wrong, and you weren't pissed. You were like, thank you, awesome. And he would always, I remember the very first car he looked at of mine was the 1949 Curtis KK2000, the blue 14 car, the Hal Cole car, which was the first Indy car that I restored on my own at my own shop for Machine Gun Ken. And I did the car so good. And Jim Mann did like the chassis on the car, and he got the offie in it and got it to a rolling state. And then I finished the car up and plumbed it and got it running. And I was so proud at using all these old hose clamps and all this old braided hose, like the old cloth braided hose. And every gauge on it, everything was perfect. And I got there, and in my mind, I was happy and proud because I had used grade 8 bolts, nice gold, bright-ass grade 8 bolts, and that was the first thing he gave me shit on. He's like, what the fuck are them bolts? Did you go down to the hardware store and get them? I said, yeah, I did. And he schooled me in on supertanium bolts. Back in the day, all the Indy cars had supertanium bolts, and they have a specific design on the head. And there's a reason why that they all had those bolts. You got them for free if you were an Indy team. So all the Indy teams, when May would come around, the bolt guys would come in, and I believe, don't hold me to it, but the Nowicki family, who still has a couple AJ Foot midgets, their family were the nuts and bolt guys, I think. I've been told that. Anyways, in the month of May, if you were an Indy team, the nut and bolt guy would come in, and Bill told me that each team would have a list of tons of bolts, and then they would pass out different lists to all their crew guys, and they would send each crew guy to the bolt truck to get bolts. And by the time May was over, you had completely outfitted your shop at home, your toolbox, and everything. So everyone had tons of free nuts and bolts.
In your grandma's garage, too.
Oh yeah, exactly, everything. So there was tons of nuts and bolts, and they were all supertanium bolts. So when you start looking at old Indy cars, go to the Indy Museum, any high-end restorations, look at the bolt heads. I know that's getting down nitty-gritty stuff, but that's how Bill was. I mean, that's why he's a 3-time Pebble Beach winner. This guy restored the cars the way they were supposed to be. I remember he told me on one of his cars, he won Pebble Beach, but he got docked 1 point because the safety wiring across the cam boxes was rotated the wrong direction. It was left, and it should have been right, according to how you're supposed to do safety wiring. But Bill, of course, whipped out a picture and shows that in the picture, they wound it the other way. So, I mean, that's how picky Bill is with his restorations, which is good. You got to be. And guys that do restoration on historical cars can tell you, you will go mad trying to do that. It's an endless search of getting things right, but Bill was the master at it. They would put up with him, a 13-year-old kid hanging out. He was that kid, that everyone has in the town or in your hot rod shop. You all got a young kid that is so ate up with it, he's going to be in it for his life. And that was Bill. He made his bones in the hot rodding world with a bunch of different hot rods. He built a 40 Ford that is bright orange, 40 Ford coupe on orange steelies on the ground. It had steelies when I saw it. It might have Halibrands on it now. But that 40 Ford coupe was on the cover of Hot Rod magazine. So, I mean, even with his hot rods, they were built perfectly. He met a bunch of hot rodders out in California. He would go out there in the wintertime, spend time. He would stay at Tom Medley's house. He was in with all the boys. I mean, he knew them all. Could call him up anytime. He ran in those circles. He always had the Indy bug, and he was at a show somewhere and talking to someone and said, I'd like to find, actually, if oh man, I'm trying to remember the story now. He was really good at plumbing cars and doing fittings and whatnot, and because he worked at a machine shop and then he worked at a college there locally, helping them out. He was good with plumbing and the details on cars. And Gambler Sprint Cars was in his backyard. And Casey Spurlock and those guys that started Gambler had Bill come in and he would plumb a lot of those cars. And he was telling me some of the cars he plumbed. And I mean, we're talking the Doug Wolfgang and the Sammy Swindell era, like the Gambler, Kenny Rogers era, right there. I mean, that was the era. He had met Kenny Rogers, and that was the era that Bill was messing with sprint cars.
And when you're talking about plumbing, you mean like the wiring harness?
No, all the brake lines, the fuel lines,
okay.
like all the that kind of plumbing, water lines, and when you're running fuel lines and brake lines, mostly fuel lines on sprint cars, you got a lot of plumbing going on with check valves and whatnot. So they would bring him in for that kind of stuff, and he was really good at like finding he had oddball little fittings and shit. And he was I believe he was at Gambler, and he had mentioned, someone said something like, what are you into? And he said, I like to find an old Indy Roadster to restore. And they knew where one was at. And he went and got that car, and that was the first Indy Roadster that he got. That took him down the path of Indy Roadsters. I know Greg Snyder found one for him. Greg Snyder is a guy in the restoration world that I respect a ton. He does restoration work, but he's also known for finding cars. I mean, he's just one of them guys that has a knack for finding cars. So he found a car for Bill, and then just, Bill started sniffing these cars out and restoring them, and he got bit by the bug hard. He also started going to Indianapolis every year, and not all of us, but anyone around the Indy circles or the vintage Indy circles, we've heard about the legendary Tuesday lunches and the Wednesday lunches that the old timers all show up to around Indy. And if you get invited to one of these lunches, go. Because the one time I went, I got to sit down and have lunch with AJ Watson and huge names at the table, but I was just flipping out because AJ Watson. So So he started going to May, and he told me about a breakfast that they would all go to. And it was this breakfast on a certain day at the beginning of May. They would all meet, and that would kick off. They would all come in from out of town, and they'd have breakfast at just one place on one day, and that would kick off their month of May. And he's telling me the first few times he went to this breakfast, the old timers there were Quinn Epperly, Ted Hallebrand, George Bignotti, all the big, huge names in Indy. Like all the names we read.
So like what year would this be?
I'm guessing 80s. I guess. I don't really know. It has to be in the 80s for some of those names. Yeah. He just told me the story when I was down there doing the 54 car, and he started telling me how over the years that breakfast started getting smaller because the guys were dying off. And it was, you could just see it. And even then I thought, damn, Bill outlived them all. And he did. So he met Quinn Epperly at that breakfast, and he befriended him and started traveling around with him. And Quinn really helped him out on a lot of the restorations. Bill already liked Epperly cars, but then that took it to a whole nother level. They were buddies. So Bill has an extremely well preserved photo collection of Epperly builds, like the shop pictures that restorers go nuts over when you're trying to find pictures of like the plumbing and the pedals and the gauges and the engine taken apart. Bill has a lot of that stuff for his cars. That's why his restorations are so good, because he was friends with Epperly, and Epperly could look at the car and say, no, that's not how I did it. So, that's something we're losing quickly, and that's why we're doing this podcast, kind of to pay homage to Bill, but also to observe that when these guys leave, they take so much information with them. I mentioned that Bill smoked, and if you knew Bill, you're probably laughing. Bill would light the next cigarette with the one in his mouth. That's what I'm talking about when he smokes. It never stopped. From the time he woke up till he went to bed, there was a cigarette in his mouth all the time. And we were at Indy a few years back, and we're on the staging. We've got all the vintage cars staged to go out, and Bill's going to take out his Bo Sealfast car. So he's in the car, he's sitting in the car, he's strapped up, and he's got his driving suit there, but he doesn't have his helmet on, and he's sitting there drawing on a cigarette. And we're all kind of, I think I was firing one of the rear engine cars, so I'm watching Bill. And the guy came through and yelled, 30 seconds, which means we're going to go out in 30 seconds. So Bill pulls a cigarette out, lights it with the one in his mouth, sticks the new one in his lips, puts his open face helmet on, puts his goggles on, and gives his guys the sign to start the car. So they fire the car up. Bill's got his cigarette there. Guy comes through, waves us out on the track. Bill pulls right out onto Indianapolis Speedway, cigarette in his mouth, and never left his mouth. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure he smoked it out there and he tossed it aside. That was Bill. The next year at Indy, when we went for our drivers' meeting, they made the announcement. There's a new rule this year. If you are in the staging areas in your race car, there is no smoking. There will be no smoking in the cars or out on the track. And we all looked over at Bill, and Bill just gave one of the eyebrows up like, fuck them. And sure enough, 2 hours later, we're pulling out on the track. Bill's got a cigarette in his mouth. Nothing changed. Just because he's one of those guys, you're not going to tell him that he can't smoke. Bill had sayings that people around him would call Akin-isms, and they were very colorful. And I got to warn you right now, some of these are going to be rough. If you knew Bill, trust me, I'm not saying them all, because there's some we just can't share here. If you know Bill and you know him, then that's your jewel to keep. But a good friend of Bill, Joe Klinkhart, helped me compile and remember some of these. So I just want to give you some of Bill's Akin-isms. And some of them you've probably heard other old-timers say. Some of them maybe not. But Bill would say something was colder than a whore's heart, hotter than the hate. I'm laughing just reading these. Hotter than the gates of hell. Crazier than a stomped rabbit, blacker than 4 foot up an ape's ass, redder than a snooker ball, softer than a baby's butt. He once told me that old Indy tires, and this is a rough one, ladies and gentlemen, but he said it many times, old Indy tires are harder than a preacher's dick and a calf's ass. And that's a quote from Bill Akin. Dumber than a box of rocks. He would say he doesn't know me from a load of coal. And he would call the quarter car wash a quarter douche. Joe Klinkhart also told me another good story, a true story of Bill back in the acetylene welding days. A guy was showing Bill some welds he had done on his car, and Bill responded, "Hell, I can weld you inside a cage before you can light the torch." And I'm filing that one away. I got to keep that one.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
I love that. I called Bill one time looking for these Firestone front tires, and Coker reproduces the half treads. And those are the Indy tires that have like 2 little grooves off to one side. And when we take cars out with those on them, that's the most asked question we get. Why are those old Indy tires grooved funny like that? People are always joking, your tires are worn out. The reason for that is that the 2 grooves off to the side, they're off to the right side of the car. And in the day, that's how the drivers would visually tell if they needed to come in and get new rubber. At speed, they could see those 2 tread lines. And when those tread lines would disappear, from what I've read in first-hand accounts of drivers and the books I've read, when those would disappear, you'd have 3 to 4 laps to get in and get tires. If you didn't get in, a white stripe would appear on the tire, and that is the cord you're seeing. And if you saw the white stripe, you had about 1 to 1.5 laps to get in before you would hear 2 explosions. One pop was the tire, the second one was you hitting the wall. And I've read that many a times. Before the half treads, Firestone came out with a front tire that had 2 skinny treads right down the center, and it was a small tire. It was like a 516. And hot rodders would kill for these tires. They look so cool. They're real narrow, and they got these cool little side treads. And our Curtis had those on the front. So I called Bill. I said, Bill, I'm looking for the very, very early narrow 16-inch front tires, because Bill's got half-tread tires. He's got the only set of half-tread Firestone 18-inch tires that are still in the wax paper. They've never been used. I mean, he's got a lot of tires that are, and used, new, and everything, but he has 2 of them that are still in the wax paper, just stacked up. So the problem with these 16-inch tires were they must only use them for a few years at Indy, because there's not many of them out there. I've only seen 1 or 2 in real life, and they're on cars in the Indy Museum. And the other problem is, I don't know what Firestone mixed with the rubber for those particular tires, but they don't survive. Every one I've ever seen's hard as a rock and cracked and crumbling and coming apart, no matter how they've been stored. So I call Bill, explain the front tires, and he says, no, I had one of them one time, and that sumbitch was so hard if you threw it across the shop floor, it would throw sparks. And that just illustrates such a good picture. So you sprint car guys out there, next time your crew chief asks you if you want a hard tire, ask them if it'll throw sparks if you throw it across the shop floor. Bill didn't seem to have much use for women. He liked them, but they weren't around much, and he wouldn't talk to them much. But for some reason, he really liked my wife, Jenny. He would talk to her. And granted, Jenny is very nice and personable, but Jenny's also got a rather busty chest. And Bill, during conversations with Jenny, Bill would only look at and address her chest. And Jenny and I would crack up laughing afterwards, and it only made us like him more. But he would sit there and talk to her about me, my restorations and everything, but eyes were directed southward. So Jenny and I would just laugh at that. This year at the Miller meet in Milwaukee, we go there, and it's the who's who of vintage Indy cars. I highly recommend it. It's an amazing show. And on Friday night, they have a big banquet, and they have a dinner, and they have a silent auction, and they honor members that have been members for a long time. And on Friday night, you go in, and I always go in early so I can get a table in the back, because I'm usually one of the youngest guys there, and the guys that I'm with are usually younger guys. And it's an old-timers deal, and everybody's got their favorite table, and I'm not going to be the kid that sits at someone's table that shouldn't be there. So I go in, I get a seat in the back, and this year at the Miller meet, it was me and Jenny and Bobby Green from Old Crow Speed Shop. I had his Eastwood Special sprint car there at the Miller meet. And I was also being paid to take care of a 1938 Bugatti Type 57, like $1 million plus race car. I got the call from a Bugatti restorer out in Colorado, a friend of mine. He said, hey, I'm sending this guy in. He's going to run the Miller meet. Can you just go babysit the car? And of course, I'm like, sure, great, yeah, sure. So I had to do some research real quick on Bugattis. So we got that guy sitting at our table with his Italian wife, and they weren't ready for Bill. So we're at the deal, and Bill, this last summer, he was at the events. They got him this little handicap scooter to zip around on, and he'd zip around on this thing, and he'd crash into shit, and he'd run over people's feet. He didn't care. But so we're we all sit down, and the place fills up, and Bill's making the rounds in his little scooter, zipping from table to table. And he comes zipping over to our table, and he leans up and looks at everyone at the table and says, got room for me? And I looked at Bobby, and I said, scoot over. So Bobby Green and I scoot over, and Bill comes up and, of course, crashes right into the table, and the drinks all move and everything. And he just starts holding court and telling stories. And him and Bobby Green hit it off right away because they both knew Tom Medley. Bobby was able to say, yeah, I knew Tom in the late years, and I'd been to his house, and Bobby rattled off the address, and that was gold to Bill Akin. Bobby was okay in Bill's eyes. So he starts telling stories of going out to Tom Medley's and hanging out in California with the early hot rod years. And the stories were golden, just amazing, but they were colorful. And I mean, the the Bugatti guy and his wife were squirming, and Jenny and I are giggling and laughing like kids that hear their uncles cussing all the time, And so we're cracking up. It's time to go get the food. And I nudged Jenny and I said, help Bill, because Bill decided to walk to get his food. And Bill, over the last 10 years, 5-10 years, he had developed a shuffle. And he would shuffle real short little shuffles. Everyone that knows Bill's laughing right now because it was the Bill shuffle. So he shuffles up there to get his food, and Jenny tried to help him. Like, let me make you a plate, Bill. Bill wasn't having that. No, I'm making my own plate. So Bill's making his own plate, and he's got his plate, and we're in line at this banquet, and there's all this amazing high-dollar layout of food out, and all the people that put it on, and the chefs, and the servers, and all the highfalutin people. And I look at Jenny and I go, it looks pretty good, doesn't it? Good food. And Jenny, trying to be nice, goes, what do you think, Bill? It looks pretty good. And Bill said, extremely loud, it'll make a turd. And I've heard from people more than once that he would say that in the middle of a restaurant. Didn't matter where you're at. If he was eating food, he would say it'll make a turd. So, the whole night, it was such an honor that to this day I cherish that dinner. We're in the room full of IndyCar giants, and Bill chose to sit at our table. And Bill chose to sit at the kids' table at dinner. That tells you all you need to know about Bill. He wasn't there to be seen. He wasn't there to show face. He was just there because everyone was into Indy cars and he was looking for a good time. And I'm sure he thought our table would be at least a good time if he was there. I'd mentioned Bill before he got on his scooter, he had a shuffle. And two summers ago, let me think about this. This is 2019, fall of 2017, right in the wintertime, 2017, 2018. Bill was finishing up his last restoration on the Epperly car. It was the Bryant Heating and Cooling Bobby Marshman car. Probably the prettiest Indy Roadster that's ever been. If you like the A.J. Foyt Bo Sealfast car or Old Calhoun, I totally get it. Park this one next to it and let's see what you think. It was a black Epperly Roadster with gold leaf engine turn lettering, red outlines, and all these side panels and the head pod and all the accessory panels were polished magnesium. So instead of flat aluminum panels on the side, it had polished magnesium panels that they had. Even the headrest was a hand-hammered magnesium panel, and they had polished it. This thing was just gorgeous. And Bill had sayings of how pretty that car was that we cannot repeat here. Just a gorgeous, gorgeous race car. He finished up the restoration, and he asked me and Dad to come down and do the gold leaf, which was an honor. And I was shitting myself because gold leaf is very fickle. It's got its own mind. Some jobs with gold leaf go really smooth. Other ones will fight you the whole way. And you can never tell which one's going to do what. So I was nervous. I've got more experience with gold leaf than my dad, but my dad is really good at laying big numbers real smooth. So we tag teamed it, and we went down, and Dad and I laid out the numbers, and of course Bill had like 30 pictures of this car that were phenomenal from every angle. You could see the lettering perfectly. It was a dream in that case. So we lettered this thing out. We went down there and we stayed for 2 days, and we did the gold leafing on the car, and it turned out gorgeous. Like, it just went perfect, and I was so happy, so relieved and happy that this guy was my hero. And I'd done this gold leaf lettering, and it looked gorgeous. The car came together, and they clear-coated it. And he was getting it ready for May in Indy. And they went for a test drive with it right down there in his town of Hermitage. And he pulled out of his driveway and drove it right up the street, right up the main road. And a couple miles up the road, comes to a stoplight with traffic. And here he sits in an Indy Roadster on methanol, cigarette in his mouth, I'm sure, in the intersection, and he's on a hill, and I don't know if He stalled it or what, I don't know what happened, but he ended up rolling backwards into the car behind him, a lady behind him, and it put a big old dent and a gash right in the 5 of the 54 on the right side. So it dented it pretty good, and he called me just distraught and cussing, but it was like a week before Indy, and he said, Josh, I'm not fixing this motherfucker. A lot of colorful language, but he said, I'm not fixing it before Indy. I'm going to bring it to Indy and run it. You'll see the dent when you get there. And at first he wanted me to fix it at Indy when he got there, and I said, hey, Bill, that ain't the way to do it, man. You're asking for trouble. Luckily, he couldn't get the tail tank painted in time, because if he would have asked me, I would have. I'd have been right there doing gold leaf in front of everyone. But luckily, they didn't get it painted in time, so it went to Indy, and it ran that whole summer with the dented tail tank. That fall, it's time for Pebble Beach, and Bill says, all right, we're pulling this thing off and fixing it. And he called me, and he said, I'm going to pull it off, and I'm going to have him paint the tail black, and then I need you to come down and do the gold leafing on the numbers. And I said, no problem, Bill. You call when you call, I will come. So they pulled it off, and they stripped it, and they went back. They bought the exact same lacquer black paint, because Bill had to use the correct paint on his cars. I mean, this guy's correct to the end. They bought the exact same type of black lacquer, and it didn't match. It just wasn't the same black, and they were fighting that. And he called me, and he said, we're getting screwed up down here because the black's not matching. And then at one point, I think it reacted on them, and I mean, they were fighting a hard battle with paint. And all you painters out there know the kind of battle this is. The problem is Pebble Beach was coming, and Bill's health was going quick. So we all knew this was Bill's last Pebble Beach, probably. And he had this gorgeous car. So he's battling back and forth, and he called me pretty distraught the one day, saying this thing's fucked up, and it's not going to make it. So they finally get black on it, and I go down, like a day later, I go down and I do the gold leaf numbers on the tail for a second time, and they turned out pretty decent, pretty good, just as good as the first time. No different, no better, no worse. Put them on, and I leave. I'm happy. I think I charged him like $300, which just covered my fuel, because I felt bad for him, all the shit they'd went through. So, and we had lost our ass on the first trip, Dad and I. Like the first trip, that was another deal. He wanted me to quote the job before I went, and I quoted the job, but I didn't quote like the travel time or the hotels, anything, because I was nervous talking to Bill. So we get down there, and Bill's like, already got the check made out, and he's like, we good? And I'm like, oh yeah, Bill, we're good, and in hindsight, it was the right thing to do, because he bragged a lot of people after that car was done that Dad and I were the only people that showed up on the day we said we were going to, did the job that we said we'd do, and charged what we told him we'd charge. He said we're the only people that did that to him, and he really liked that, and he raved about that. And so I'm happy. I don't care if we lost our ass. I'm happy. So I go down there, and I did the numbers, and I leave, and Bill calls 2 days later. When they clear-coded the gold leaf numbers, it reacted and went berserk. And Bill's panicking. And now it's on me, and I'm shitting because I've let my hero down.
How did it react?
They said that the gold got real splotchy. It got real splotchy, which I've seen it do before, and there was black specks in it, which I'd never seen before. He said there was these black dots in it, like paint had gotten spattered on it, and I didn't have any blackout, so I didn't know what it was. But it reacted, and it looked like hell, and he was hot, and not really mad at me, but just mad at the world. And I'm telling Bill, and he's saying, what the fuck are we going to do? And I said, well, and we're talking like we're a week and a half away from Pebble Beach, and from when the car has to go on the truck to get out there. So he's kind of panicking, and I said, Bill, tell your painter, there's 2 things you guys can do here. I said, did you guys bury it in clear? And they did. They had buried this thing in clear. And I said, well, you can wet sand that clear and just shoot it black right over that clear, and I'll come down and we'll re-gold leaf it, and we're good to go. If you guys want to try to get that off, you're going to have to wet sand or DA that all the way down, and then you're going to have to high build primer, because you're going to get it uneven by DAing it. So there's a lot of work here you got to figure out, and I knew his painter would know what I meant. So it turns out they went to the painter, and I think they just wet sanded what was there, and they shot him black again, And I told Bill, I said, Bill, you call me the day it's ready. I will come that day. I'm coming in. So Bill called me on a Wednesday. The car's leaving the following Tuesday. They got it painted black. I drop everything, haul ass for Tennessee, lay the gold leaf on it, and as luck would have it, it went the best it's ever went. And in fact, I was able to at this point they had the bumper on it and the headrest on it, so I was able to align the numbers even better to match the pictures. So we got it as a home run. God damn, it looked good. I left there on Thursday. I was done. I said, you guys can clear this tomorrow. This is gold leaf. I recommend clearing it tomorrow. Don't let anything get on this leaf. Get it buried. Clear it, get it on. That weekend, I went to the Gilmore Car Museum with my mom and dad and Jenny, and I got a call from Bill Saturday. And I answered the phone hoping to say, we're good, buddy. It looks great. And I answered the phone. And I said, well, tell me what it's up. And he said, we're fucked. And I said, oh, shit. And he said, I don't know what the fuck's going on. It's got black dots in it. And I cannot figure out what these black dots are he's talking about. And I just don't. And I said, Bill, I don't know what to do. I did everything the same. I didn't change the gold leaf. I used the same leaf I had. I didn't change one supply that I had, the thinner, the reducer, I didn't change one thing. And Bill understood that, but he was still distraught. And I'm crushed because I've screwed up Bill's. Hold on. Let me close this out and then I'll start that again.
Yeah, sure.
I didn't think we'd be going until 9.
Oh, you're good. Just start with and I'm crushed.
Yep. And I'm crushed because I've screwed up my hero's car. And Bill's, like I said, he keeps talking about these black dots. And all he keeps saying is, I'm sunk. I'm sunk. And he didn't have to say it, but we knew this is the last Pebble Beach he's going to. And he wanted to win with his car so bad. He wanted another Pebble Beach. And he was going up against some really stiff competition. We knew the cars that were going to be there. They were on the level. So they just had to finish the car and ship it. And Bill wasn't happy. And Bill had already told me how he had Epperly's living family was going out to see it. And I mean, it was this big deal. And here I'm the guy that fucked it all up. So I'm feeling terrible. And so they go out and I don't hear anything else. They go out there and they have the show and Bill gets second place. And of course, first thing I think of is, oh God, it's because of the lettering. You know, it's where my brain goes. I should have known better because the car that won was phenomenally restored. It's a good car. It deserved to win. So did Bill's. So I don't know. It's just, it's a close race. The car that won is a very well received car. It's a beautiful race car. So Bill gets second place. I don't hear anything. I wait about 3 or 4 days to call Bill, hoping that he's cooled down. I call Bill and I said, well, tell me about Pebble Beach. And his first word is, you're a clever son of a bitch. You know that? And I said, oh, that's good. That's a good answer. And I said, oh, yeah, what's up? And he goes, I don't know what the hell that was, but when we got out to Pebble Beach and got that car out in the sun, that lettering was perfect. So to this day, I don't know what happened. I don't know what changed with the lettering. I don't know what they were seeing. I don't care. The bottom line is Bill was happy with it at Pebble Beach. He felt in his heart that the car that beat him was good. He wasn't sour. He knew. He said, yeah, we did our best. I had a beautiful car. That was the last car Bill restored. That's this current Pebble Beach here that just happened 6 to 8 months ago. So that was very current. But that was when I would call Bill on the phone, that was when you'd make a phone call to Bill, it was entertaining. There was times that I would call Bill just to I loved when I had a question to ask Bill because you were going to have a fun conversation with him. You could call and ask a technical question on an Offenhauser engine, and you would get some phenomenal old Indy stories. And anyone that's ever talked to Bill on the phone knows that when you're even getting close to being done to talking, Bill will cut you off with, okay, bye. And hang up. That was it. Just, okay, bye. Bill fed turkeys at his house. And if you've been to his house, you've seen his turkeys. And he had a dozen turkeys that would come right up to his driveway, right outside his garage. And he'd feed them every day. And he had one albino turkey that was solid white, and he called it his white girl. And he'd yell, "Come on, white girl," and he'd throw corn out to her. And I used to think that was so neat that he had turkeys. And then now I've moved into this new house, and I've got like 40 turkeys out here that I'm feeding every day. So that was one of the first things when Bill's health started failing and he was in hospice. I called him to ask him, what do I feed my turkeys? And I had already been feeding them for weeks, but I just wanted an excuse to call Bill. And he told me all about feeding them and whatnot. And I've been thinking about what's... I'm sure his turkeys are looking for food right now. So, the only recordings I have of Bill, and it's how we're going to wrap this up. When I was down there fixing the tail tank the second or third time, he went out and we looked at some of his hot rods, and he was explaining to me how he built the wheels on his Model A Roadster, the one with the 4-cam Ford in it. He had built them from scratch, and I mean, made them himself, machined them himself. And he describes in this recording I'm going to play of how he made them. And I was filming while he was talking, and so you purposely hear me ask the question, like, explain to me how you made those, and he explains it. And you got to understand, it's, he's drawing on a cigarette and he's sitting in the car telling me this. And it's just a great story. And it's a great way that I remember Bill. When I think of Bill in my head, I think of him with a cigarette in his mouth and sitting in his race car. That's how I picture him. So enjoy this recording of Bill. And if you were lucky enough to ever meet Bill, you have good stories to tell. So thank you guys very much, and I'll see you next time. Who made those wheels with no lug holes?
Me.
Did you?
Yeah. The rims, see how the rims don't have a drop center?
Yeah.
That lets you make those vent holes bigger, but you got to take the rim apart to change the tire.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But those the rims are some kind of sprint car center line or something bolt together sprint car wheel rim hatch. But the centerpieces I made.
They look good.
Well, they're a little dated now.
Yeah, I like them. Shit, you could say that about Halliburton's and they still look good.
Well, see, I cut those centerpieces out of a piece of 2-inch plate and then drilled a hole in the middle, just a register hole in the middle, where I could mount them in a lathe and turn them through. And then I went to this big ass fucking radial drill press to drill the vent holes and drill them with a 3-inch drill bit. And then step the holes off, hold the rim half together on the same radial drill press. And then they had a lathe that had a hydraulic tracer. You could take a piece and had the same shape as what you wanted the lathe to turn and bolt it down. The stylus followed it and controlled the lathe hydraulically. And that's how I got those centers like that. And making the first one was a bunch of fun, but the other 3 was a pain in the ass. It was work.